Our speaker this evening is Sarah Mekdjian, who only a couple of weeks ago defended her dissertation and got not only successfully but gloriously. And I understand that after the dissertation, the committee examining her got up and sang the Ninth Symphony chorale at the end. She got very high, what is it called in France? Well, it's the equivalent of the summa cum laude that we have here, and we're very, very happy for her and very proud of her if we may be. I'm sure you have a lot of family and friends who were, but we too will share a little bit in the glory. The dissertation she completed is Immigrant Urban Places? Or the,
it's called From the Enclave to the Urban Kaleidoscope.
From the Enclave to the Urban Kaleidoscope. It's a study of Los Angeles Armenians. And it's interesting that we had to bring French scientists or scientists from France to study Los Angeles. No one else would understand it. She is challenging in her dissertation the Chicago view of diasporas, of concentric circles, that is, immigrants coming in one place, then gradually pulling out and going to the suburbs. And she argues that that model, at least in Los Angeles, doesn't work and maybe should be challenged in general. And we hope that her stay here will give her a chance to expand and look at the communities in Detroit and Boston as older communities as opposed to Los Angeles itself. She has published already several articles based on her dissertation, and we are hoping that she'll turn her dissertation into a nice book for publication. And we also look forward to her teaching next semester a course in the history department on, and what was the title of the course?
It's called Immigrants and Place in Urban Contemporary America.
Immigrants and Place in Urban Contemporary America. So it's quite a wide-ranging but very focused course. And we wish her good luck in that. Today, Sarah will speak to us on the critical reading of the elite mass model, towards democracy in the Armenian diaspora, which implies that we need to move there. And please join me in welcoming Sarah, the speaker for this evening.
So thank you for coming. I'm very glad to be here in front of you and doing this paper. I would like to sincerely thank Professor Mekdjian for allowing me to be part of the Armenian Studies program. I really couldn't have expected a better environment to learn and embrace new perspectives and knowledge. And being here is really an outstanding opportunity for which I am extremely grateful. So today, talk is called A Critical Reading of the Elliots Mass Model. And I will start with actually one quote of Professor Mekdjian's book. Professor Mekdjian, in his book, says that there cannot be revolution in the diaspora. And if we cannot speak of revolution, is there a place in the Armenian diaspora of today for resistances which would challenge the existing powers and open new directions for the future? So today, I will examine the structure of power in immigrant communities, and more specifically in diasporas. Unlike nation-states, whose powers are based on a clearly bounded territory, immigrant communities and diasporas have developed other forms of power, mainly networks of institutions, facing the challenge of dispersion. The idea of forming a government in exile is recurrent in many discourses of diasporic institutions, as in the literature about diaspora. And here I'm thinking about Khachik Tololian's work, talking about the Armenian government in exile. Following this idea, an opposition between politically and financially active elites and a silent mass of citizens in exile is emphasized. Here, I will try today to show that the hierarchy between these active political elites and a passive mass does not capture the distribution of power within exiled communities, such as the Armenian diaspora. Instead, I believe that this distinction between an elite and a mass can be understood as part of a broader strategy created by the existing political institutions to maintain their power and create a situation of hegemony. In order to go beyond this elite and mass binarism, I suggest to consider power not only as a top-down force, but also as a force coming from below. And power not only repressive, but also creative in its nature, implying resistances and novelty. I didn't create actually this thought about power. And as the slide is showing, these 2 points are from Michel Foucault's philosophy on power. And I will take those 2 points as my 2 hypotheses. So these 2 points, based again on Michel Foucault's definition of power, lead us to a central question. Are resistances possible within communities in exile led by what I call conservative ideologies which emphasize cultural continuity and political unity? As you saw in this picture, this man is demanding unity, and it's a slogan that we hear very often in the diaspora, and not only in the Armenian case, but I'm thinking also about the Jewish case. So my lecture today is organized in 3 sections. First, I will define the concept of elite, and it's not an easy concept to define. This concept is classically used to describe the political structure of diasporas, and I will try to show that it's a normative category of practice as well as of analysis. In a second point, I will try to demonstrate how some specific techniques of power, defined as disciplinary techniques, again by Michel Foucault, are used by the self-declared elites to maintain what I call their domination. Finally, I will show how power is always to be challenged by resistances and growing innovative forces. So by resistances, I mean any force opposing hegemony and or homogenization, leading to a certain degree of novelty. According to Michel Foucault again, and as you understand, my talk is really based on his thought, which I think is interesting, but we can discuss that later. According to Michel Foucault, resistances are not outside of power. Instead, they are inherent in every power relations. Power implies counterpower and cannot be understood only as a repressive superstructure. It is a force which circulates and which can also induce individuals to speak against. Different dimensions of resistances need to be distinguished. From revolutionary resistances, sometimes conflicting with democratic systems, and maybe I'm thinking of civil wars, to civil disobedience, defined as the active refusal to abide by certain laws and commands of a government or of a power. Resistances can be found in political ideologies proper or in the means by which ideologies are enforced. Resistances don't take only the form of open, organized, and confrontational practices like in civil wars. Instead, I believe they consist in various practices of subversion on different levels, and here I will focus on the Los Angeles on a local level, which imply different degrees of novelty. Understanding how relations of power are produced within immigrant communities, and here in the case in the Armenian diaspora, is part of a broader question, dealing with the construction of ethnic boundaries and of a collective subject. Here, some question I will address today. Who speaks on behalf of all dispersed Armenians? Who addresses claims in the name of an imagining collective subject using the first-person plural we? How the leadership of the Armenian diaspora can be instituted from below when there is no elections, like in the nation states, of course. Is it possible to envision a diaspora which would renounce the archetype of unity? Could the Armenian diaspora build an identity that not merely welcomes an alterity, but also allows itself to be altered and changed? Resistances, as we always hear and as I heard a lot during my fieldwork, are often understood as divisions. Divisions threatening the notion of unity, on which the elites rely to legitimate and enforce their power. The rhetoric of unity constitutes one of the main community leader strategies to produce and maintain relation of domination. I will argue here for the need of resistances as creative forces from which power can be redistributed, as in participatory democratic systems, where power has to be gained through elections and not only instituted from the elites, namely. Now let me tell you a little bit more what awoke my interest in this topic. My PhD dissertation, as Professor Libardian mentioned just earlier, dealt with one of the largest Armenian concentrations in the world outside Armenia, Los Angeles. It included, my dissertation included questions like, how can we understand the ways in which ethnicity constructs social space in multicultural cities? How is it that power, and mainly relations of domination and resistances within the immigrant communities, shapes urban space? I was looking at urban space. Los Angeles is really unique in the diaspora, and I'm sure a lot of people here heard about Los Angeles and Glendale, I should say. It's unique not only because by its large numbers of immigrants, but also because the city hosts one of the most heterogeneous Armenian community in the world, regarding the geographical origins of the immigrants, but also the social and economic status of the same immigrants. Los Angeles still to date hosts new waves of immigrants coming mainly from Armenia and from the Middle East in general. The specificity of Los Angeles is also due to the high degree of politicization of the Armenian community, reflected in part by the large marches held in the city on various occasions. And I'm sure some of you here saw pictures about the marches against the Armenian-Turkey protocols recently. Also, the high concentration of Armenian institutions, I think, is very unique in Los Angeles. So I looked into the places of settlement of Armenian immigrants and their descendants in the Los Angeles metropolitan area. I discovered that their spatial distribution, was polycentric, irreducible to a one ethnic enclave structure. And I tried to show that the intra-community relation of power between both individuals and institutions could possibly explain this polycentric distribution into multiple centers. While looking at power relations, again, on a local level in Los Angeles, I observed that various types of resistances and criticism arose towards existing powers in the Armenian community and the elected authorities in the Los Angeles city and in Glendale. I tried to show that it is because of resistances and diversity within the group that the spatial structure of the Armenians in LA cannot be reduced to one homogeneous enclave, as the Chicago School of Sociology is referring to. I compared this polycentric distribution to a moving kaleidoscope, and I won't develop that, but I like the metaphor. The movement being created by the power and by these resistances. My dissertation, as well as this lecture, are based on a 4-year fieldwork in Los Angeles inside the Armenian community. I was living in Little Armenia with a family coming from Armenia. And in order to understand the relations of power at work in Los Angeles within the community, I conducted a qualitative survey of 130 Armenian immigrants community leaders and Los Angeles city officials, and a quantitative online survey with a sample of 745 interviewees. I do not dare make generalizations out of the Los Angeles case about the global diaspora. It would be very hard. However, I hope that the trends I'm going to present today, analyzed in Los Angeles, might lead to a better understanding of the social and political structure of these communities which claim to be diasporas. So I'm moving here to the first point, and I will try to define what is an elite and more specifically, what is a political elite. In his article, Elites and Institutions in the Armenian translation, Hachik Tololian uses the notion of elites in reference to the institutions in exile. The author uses this concept as an equivalent to institution and to the adjective diasporic, which designates, according to his terminology, the category of the most active Armenian immigrants and descendants. Hachik Tololian highlights 4 institutions as being diasporic and, as it called them, transnational. I'm quoting him. Chiefly the Church, the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, the Armenian Democratic Liberal Party, and the Armenian General Benevolent Union, unquote. Regarding specifically the Armenians in the United States, Ani Bakalian insists on the importance of the 3 Armenian churches, Apostolic, Protestant, and Catholic. I should actually add 4 with the 2 Apostolic churches, and of course of the 3 main political parties. According to Ani Bakalian, they are, quote, supra-local formal organizations, end of quote. And here I have a question. Are the concepts of elites, institutions, transnational or supra-local organizations all equivalent? Are we actually talking about the same organizations? Yes. Well, Ani Bakalian is referring to the same organization than Hachik Tololian. But what is exactly a political elite, and what is why Hachik Tololian decided to use that specific concept? The role of institutions is undeniable in the visibility of Armenians outside Armenia. First, it's a material visibility through the construction of specific buildings, for example, churches in the urban landscapes. And second, a civic visibility in the public space of the host societies. However, is the elite mass model relevant to understand the social organization of dispersed Armenian societies? Are institutions or elites, and again I'm going to go to the definition in a second, distinct from a mass? And are they deciding these elites? That's all right. We all know. Are they deciding individual civic representations and practices? So the concept of elite itself is taken originally from the Latin eligere, meaning to elect. From the 18th century, the term elite was applied to individuals who had obtained prominence through their own personal achievements, by contrast with the ascribed status of the higher clergy and the aristocracy. However, during the age of industrialization, and here I'm talking about the 19th century, the term increasingly changed to denote a relatively fixed boundary between the upper class and all the others. Therefore, the term elite became normative in its designation. In the political science literature, there is no consensus as to the definition of the term elite. For some, elites are the decision makers of the community or the society whose power is not subject to control by any other body in the society. For others, elites are the sole source of values in the community and constitute the integrating force without which the community may fall apart. And that's this last definition that is broadly used in the diaspora literature. Elites have been regarded as a chief threat to democracy, or on the contrary, as a symbols of democracy itself, protecting him from the danger of totalitarianism. In the context, and again it's a specific context, of exiled communities and diasporas, where elections, I said that just earlier, are made impossible by dispersion, the elites often designate the institutions and some rich individuals to be responsible for the preservation of collective boundaries and interests. I will argue that in that specific context of exiled communities, the elite mass model is mostly used by the institutions themselves as a political ideology and a strategy to maintain their power. Here, we are considering the elite mass model mainly from a political point of view. We are not considering the elites as one homogeneous class, unlike the Marxian theory, but rather as a category of practice, meaning a category used by the institutions themselves, by various ranges of institutions and individuals to find some legitimacy. The competition and conflicts among political parties, churches, and other types of organization prevent these elites from being understood as an internally homogeneous entity, of course. Here in my talk, I will define elites not as those in power compared to an apathetic mass, but as those who during specific times claim to be representative of a certain group as a whole. In other words, those who use we to address collective issues. The use of the first person plural tends to enforce and again legitimize the power and the representativity of these institutions. So, going to the second point of the first part, elites tend to speak in the name of the whole. They use the first person plural we and tend to make decisions in the name of the community. Their power is not something fixed, given once and for all. New forms of hierarchies and differences among them come into existence, and others become obsolete and get forgotten throughout space and time. I believe that using the term elite as a category of analysis leads to actually reify power. We need to break with vernacular categories and common sense understandings like the assumption of an intrinsic superiority shared by a minority over a majority. We should not uncritically adopt categories of political practice as our categories of analysis. Elites should be conceptualized not as substances or entities, but rather in relational, dynamic, and contextualized terms. And actually, we can say that for almost everything. But I believe that elite needs to be also be contextualized. The distinction between elite and mass can be understood as the one between diasporic and immigrants. Those divisions are part of a normative view on the diaspora. Going back to Rachik-Tololian's paper, Rachik-Tololian distinguished three types of Armenian immigrants, according to their degree of involvement in the community. He distinguished what he calls the assimilated, the ethnics, and the diasporics. And here I'm quoting him. They are the assimilated, who are counted only for purposes of inflating the figures of the community, for consolation, he says. Then there are the ethnics, who retain some demonstrable, persistent, and symbolic connections with one or more communal institutions and identities. And third, there are the diasporic members, strictly defined, who evince consequential efforts to sustain organized and perhaps institutionalized connection with diasporic communities and with the homeland when possible. End of quote. Here, in Rachik-Tololian's definition, the mass would be composed mostly of the assimilated and maybe also the ethnics. In the classical elitist theory, the mass is typically atomized. The members of the mass are not organized for concerted political action. Instead, each person tends to live their own private life. You're either part of an institution or you just don't really care about your Armenian identity or sense of belonging. And then, therefore, you're part of the mass. The members of the mass, still according to this elitist theory, are not organized for concerted political action. I just said that. Sorry. The mass is being, I think in this classical elitist theory, is being really reified as an addition of indistinct individuals characterized by inertia. The mass is able to act as a single unit only when it is integrated from outside by the elites, again, according to the elitist theory. This unity is entirely a figure of discourse. It does not rise spontaneously from below or from within the mass. The fact that individuals may be active at one point of their lives in an institution and not another is not taken into account in this model. You're part of the elites, like almost you were born in the elite, or not. These distinctions made by Khachik-Tolyan, again, and he's not part of the elitist theory, I think when he really distinguished the three types of, let's say, Armenian, these distinctions are not moral. They reflect, however, normative hierarchies and judgments made and used by Armenian individuals and institutions. During my interviews, a lot of the interviewees differentiated between diasporic Armenians on the one hand and ethnics or immigrants or Armenians from Armenia on the other hand. The term diasporic Armenian is not only descriptive, making reference to the situation of dispersion, but also normative, describing different degrees of community involvement. To be part of the diaspora, one needs to be active in the Armenian institutions. That's the condition. The question, what does diaspora or spyrk in Armenian mean to you? To that question, I was asking in my interviews, a young woman declaring an Armenian ancestry and born in Iran answered, quote, "A diaspora or the Armenian diaspora describes people living outside Armenia, but who in one way or another participate in events and fundraisers benefiting Armenia and the Armenian cause," end of quote. These categorizations are not only produced through ordinary language, like in this interview, but also through social practices. How is the power of the self-declared elites maintained and embodied by the individuals? What would make this young girl believe that if you're not involved in any institutions, you're actually not part of the diaspora? I would like now to look at the specific techniques used by those who speak in the name of the whole to maintain their position of domination. I will look at the picture says at the Armenian athletic organizations, namely the Homenetmen and the Armenian Youth Federation. Among those organizations, power is produced along a top-down strategy from the institutions in power to the individuals. The practice developed by the athletic organizations aim at educating and training the mass in order to control the individuals. This analysis is based on the disciplinary power defined by Michel Foucault. In Michel Foucault's thought, discipline is the repressive pole of power. Its basic goal is to produce an individual who is not only docile, but who internalized embodied collective norms. So how the hierarchies of power between the so-called elites and mass are produced and reproduced in the community. In Discipline and Punished, one of the most famous books of Michel Foucault defines disciplinary power regarding the history of jails and the penal system in France. Disciplinary power, I'm not saying this is jail, but I will use some of his analysis to understand how these athletic organizations work. Disciplinary power aims to create individual units from a mass of bodies controlled by the values of the state. The success of disciplinary power depends on hierarchical observation and normalizing judgment. Disciplinary institutions create a mechanism of control of the mass and the individuals which compose it. The Armenian political parties essentially normalize what is characterized as the mass. The body, and here I'm talking about the body, very material body, is observed and trained by athletic organizations. One of the main objectives being individual embodiment of the political ideologies of their affiliated political parties. And as Foucault suggests, quote, nothing is more material, physical, corporal than the exercise of power, end of quote. So sportive associations and scouts are not specific to the Armenians, of course. We can talk about scouts for not only immigrant communities, but also nation scout associations. In this case, they are mostly the results of nationalism in exile created by many different immigrant groups. One of the most famous athletic organizations is in the Armenian diaspora is the Homenetmen. Homenetmen means in Armenian Hai, Marnagertagan Ընտանուր Միություն, translated into Armenian General Sportive Union. Marnagertagan means sportive. Its root is the noun marmin, meaning the body, and gertel, to train, to educate. We really find here, I think, what I just said about training the body. The spatial distribution of the Homenetmen reflects a hierarchical structure, like the political parties. The chapters are organized by continent and subcontinent. Los Angeles belongs to the Western America section. There are 17 local chapters in Western America, among which 14 are in California and 6 in the Los Angeles County. The local chapter in Glendale, created in 1978, is the core of the organization with 2,339, to be precise, members in 2009. And its name, Ararat, reinforces, of course, its centrality in reference to the symbolic value of the mountain. In addition to the Homenetmen, the Armenian Youth Federation, AYF, is also quite influential. Founded in the 30s in Boston as a section of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, this organization is mainly athletic, but also they have cultural activities. Competitions are organized with the local chapters and also with Homenetmen's chapters. And since 1934, which is pretty old, I think, the AYF, as you probably know, organizes Olympic Games on a global level. The objectives of these two associations are the following, and here I'm going to quote quickly their missions, as it is called. Quote, the mission of Homenetmen is to prepare physically strong Armenians and exemplary citizens with the highest intellectual and spiritual values by teaching endurance, courage, nationalism and patriotism, abidance of the law and orderliness. The aims and purposes of the AYF are as follows. First, to bring together Armenian youth, to work in cooperation with the RRF towards the establishment of a united, free, and independent Armenia, to foster nationalistic pride amongst all Armenian youth through educational, political, cultural, athletic, and social activities. These two quotes, I think, tells a lot about the subordination of the ideology of the organization, which goes through the subordination of the body itself. Repeating movements in a specific order as a technique to respect and literally embody the social or political order of the party. Nationalism and patriotism are the core, of course, of what is set of a quasi-military rules. And scouts, of course, are quasi-military groups. The political role of this training is emphasized by the two organizations, which implicitly compare sportive competition to political fights. The governance of the body and of the physical force is actually here a political stake. it is what Michel Foucault calls physics of power, in which, quote, the body is a target of power, end of quote. These disciplinary techniques contribute to reinforce the existing hierarchies within the community on a local as well as on a global levels. These organizations are to be found throughout the space of the Armenian global dispersion. The structures of power within immigrant communities are not only produced by its various members, as I tried to show with the example of the athletic organization. I will now argue in a second point that it is in the interest of the local authorities of the host country, and here namely the Los Angeles City Council President Eric Garcetti, you see the banner on the picture, to reinforce the power of the self-declared immigrant elites. I will look at the relation between Los Angeles municipal authorities and the Armenian immigrants and community leaders regarding the creation of Little Armenia, a specific neighborhood in Los Angeles founded in 2000. This picture is actually taken in Little Armenia. It is during the Armenian Cultural Day, which is held every year on May 28th. It's also organized to celebrate the first independence of Armenia by the AYF. And Eric Garcetti and other officials in Los Angeles always come and make a speech to say how the Armenian community is fabulous, how the AYF is great, and we should keep working together. So that's basically what they're doing here. The creation of Little Armenia in 2000 has been initiated by local business owners in 1999 and officialized by Los Angeles municipal authorities in 2000. The application has been written in 1999 not by political parties, but by 6 Armenian business owners from the neighborhood, and sent to Jackie Goldberg, who was the 13th district elected official in the city of Los Angeles. In 2000, Jackie Goldberg announced the official creation of the neighborhood, and her successor, Eric Garcetti, I just mentioned, elected to hold the same position in 2000 and current elected official for the 13th district, showed an incredible support towards Little Armenia, and I should say also towards the Armenian Revolutionary Federation. Eric Garcetti has always been present at every Armenian genocide commemorative march, not only present, but give a huge speech. He encouraged the creation of a sister city program with Los Angeles and Yerevan. He went to Yerevan, actually, and the sister city program is now complete. He used, of course, the image of Little Armenia, and he helped organize this Armenian Cultural Day. It's called Armenian Cultural Day, but it's actually celebration of the first Armenian independence. So the classic political parties didn't create Little Armenia. That's the product of the business owners. The local authorities, however, took this opportunity to tighten their links with the most visible Armenian political institution in Los Angeles, namely the Dashnak Party or the ARF. These links serve several interests. The electoral interest, one being of great value, of course. The Dashnak, with the Armenian National Committee, an affiliated lobby created in order to endorse Armenian American politicians in the US, play a role in the local politics. Also, in the 13th district, the Armenian population constitutes a sizable community. Moreover, Eric Garcetti is trying to develop a police and foster penal cooperation between the cities of Los Angeles and Yerevan to imprison Armenians under arrest who committed crimes in Los Angeles and escaped to Armenia. The Sister City program, when he went to Yerevan, he made sure to meet with all the police officials to make this program happen. The Dashnak Party's interest to side Eric Garcetti is to legitimate its power in the community. Here is an example of a practical cooperation between Eric Garcetti and the party. Since 2002, and with the agreement of Garcetti again, the youth section of the party, AYF, the Armenian Youth Federation, organized an annual day of street cleaning in Little Armenia. Here is what Dispersed, the Armenian daily newspaper, is saying about this local campaign and why such an event is organized every year. Quote, "The event was first organized as a way to give back to the local community and the city of Los Angeles in appreciation of the city's designation of the Little Armenia neighborhood. The Armenian American community," here is the AYF talking in the name of the hall, "is honored to have an area of Los Angeles designated as Little Armenia, and the AYF feels it is our duty as Armenian Americans and Angelinos to reciprocate this gesture," said AYF Central Executive Member Shant Melkonian. So, the official creation of Little Armenia is part of Diaspora strategy and the elected officials as well as of Armenian community leaders. Rather than a relation of competition between these two actors, between these two, let's say, elites, it is cooperation which is implemented. The control is in the hands of the municipality of the urban space, and it requires regulating the power within the immigrant communities by paradoxically reinforcing the existing hierarchies. The multiculturalist agenda of the city of Los Angeles strengthens nationalism among the Armenian immigrant community. The creation of Little Armenia in 2000 shows that Los Angeles local authorities not only supported the idea of a clearly demarcated Armenian territory, but also reinforced the power and the legitimacy of the self-declared elites. To sum up, the hierarchies and the norms within the Armenian community are produced not only by the Armenian institutions, but also by the American local officials who reinforce them. The disciplinary techniques of power consist in making the boundaries between the elites and the mass, and in controlling the individuals who compose the so-called mass. If the disciplinary techniques are effective, power remains an ambiguous concept. In addition to the disciplinary techniques in order to control space and people, power also produces inevitable form of resistances. Power has a double function of coercion, to norm, to assign, and of resistance, to challenge the normative assignments. These two processes complement each other. I will now study in the last point an example of an innovative and emerging power from what is generally defined as the mass. The emergence in Los Angeles of a new political power, namely the Unified Young Armenian organization. And here you have just a flyer of one of the meetings they organized in the Glendale Public Library about Armenia and foreign policy in the Caucasus. Something kind of unusual, I have to say. The design of the flyer, the topic of the flyer, no genocide in the flyer, is pretty, I think, innovative, or I think new.
Sarah, can I interrupt?
Sure.
Is it the same faces except for the American?
It is. The American face is a face of an old man, and the three faces are the same, and it's a young child.
Is there any meaning to it?
Oh, I'm sure there is. The father of the small republics, maybe. The legit.
In Russia, so
Right. Well, you're the political scientist here. Maybe I'll.
figure it out.
Yeah. Thank you. But definitely, I mean, symbolism is everywhere, especially in the flyer of an organization which is trying to have some power. So yeah. Thank you. This organization, the Unified Young Armenians, and here you have the logo with the eagle on the top of the flyer, was founded by Armenian students born in Armenia. And I will try to demonstrate in this last point that it challenges the power of the dominant Armenian political parties locally in Los Angeles, not on a global basis, but locally. First, before going directly to the second point, unifying our Armenians, I will try to show that there is a constant possibility of disagreeing in the community. So how can power be plural, decentralized, and ubiquitous, as Foucault suggests? If power is defined as a set of relations distinct from total domination, which resistances can be found within the hierarchical structure of the Armenian diaspora? I tried to highlight before this hierarchical structure. Because power is a relation, according to Foucault, it can only exist where there is a second term that answers it. The others, in the case of the Armenian communities, designate all those who at a particular time are not part or are not allowed to be part of the self-declared elites. In today's diaspora, the others are often the Armenians from Armenia, stigmatized and stereotyped as being an apathetic group of newcomers. This is a classic discrimination of the newcomer by the established immigrants, and this discrimination overlaps the distinction between elite and mass. From the hypothesis of inevitable resistances from the others, the analysis of the American philosopher Stanley Cavell about community can be used to understand how resistances rise. According to Cavell, our common identity is articulated in conversations in which we as individuals give our sense of what should count for us and why. The public community exists in our representation of it, a representation that is always vulnerable to your or my own repudiation. Such repudiation is not a simple matter. It is an act of resistance. And as soon as I stop saying we and when I say I, it's often because I don't feel my voice is heard. Resistances rise when an individual or a set of individuals think that their voices are neither heard, as I just said, nor part of that we expressed by those who speak on their behalf. Stanley Cavell, and he is a philosopher and he looks really at linguistic and when is this we used, evokes the constant possibility to break off the agreements founding the principle of community. Sandra Logier, who is a French scholar and who studied Stanley Cavell's thought, commenting on Cavell, explains, quote, "The impossibility or the difficulty to come to an agreement would be the proof of the existence of a community, and not the indicator that we lost it. A non-critical adherence to community is a myth," unquote, or end of quote. Disagreements among the self-declared elites are numerous. Conflicts among them are necessary in the sense that they open the way to criticism and new ideas. The proliferation of Armenian institutions in the United States since the 70s is an indicator of a vibrant community which wonders about itself, about its boundaries, its values in the changing world and diaspora. The foundation in the early 70s of the Armenian Assembly of America, and I have to say that I discussed that with Professor Libraidian, is unprecedented and marks a new step in the diaspora political structure. Headquartered in Washington, D.C., the Armenian Assembly of America has a particularity to be a nonpartisan Armenian-American advocacy organization. The Assembly challenges the techniques of political actions within the community by introducing new lobbying techniques outside the classical parties. Its creation was followed by the establishment of a new political branch within the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, the Armenian National Committee, who more or less follows the agenda of the RF, but who is also focusing on endorsing Armenian-American candidates and non-Armenian candidates in U.S. local and national or state elections. The creation of an innovative organization like the Armenian Assembly of America implied some innovations within the Armenian Revolutionary Federation. This example shows that even resisting to an existing power is not the first or the main goal of an organization like the Assembly. The changes made in the techniques of political action had an impact on the Armenian leadership in America. The Armenian Assembly of America embodies, I believe, another voice in the diaspora, even though sometimes they agree with the other parties, but they try to make their own voice here heard. The case of the Unified Young Armenians, created in the years 2000 and best known for organizing the annual march for the commemoration of the Armenian genocide on April 24th in Little Armenia, is an example of a resisting movement growing from below and from the new waves of immigrants from Armenia. The Unified Young Armenians is an Armenian organization founded in 2001 in Los Angeles by young students born in Armenia. Its aim is to represent the Armenian youth outside the classical world offered by the established Armenian institutions. To become a member, and that I think is pretty original, one has to be between the age of 16 and 31. After 31, one can be an honorary friend of the UIA with limited decision power. Self-defined as an independent youth movement, the UIA was founded specifically to offer another voice to those who felt misrepresented, as it is explained in their agenda. Here I will quote part of the UIA agenda so you'll hear their voice. Quote, "The UIA is an independent and apolitical organization run by the youth." I have to say something here. Apolitical, you'll see that that's everything but apolitical, but they claim to be apolitical. As a non-profit organization comprised of educated, professional, and dedicated men and women, we take upon ourselves to tackle many issues often ignored by the establishment. The Unified Young Armenians organization was created because there was a clear need for action and change within the Armenian community, especially for the youth, who are always considered outsiders on many Armenian-related issues. The youth never had a voice, they say, presenting them as an efficient and capable force. The activities range from publishing a quarterly magazine geared towards tackling many issues ignored in our communities, to providing Armenian language and history classes for the public free of charge. The organization, with the help of its sponsors, provides scholarships to the needy and exceptional students in Armenia. The organizations hope to eradicate the artificial divides within the Armenian community by showing that the youth can actually work together in a harmonious manner. End of quote. So this organization is composed of hundreds of active members, and of course it cannot be compared to any of the established institutions. They don't have the same financial nor political power, of course. The UIA is a Los Angeles-based organization who is, again, mostly active locally. However, it is now one of the most visible Armenian organizations in Los Angeles. Thanks to a strategy of visibility on the web, they have, 3,000 friends on Facebook, for example. Every year since 2001, the organization is able to gather several thousands of people in Little Armenia on April 24th. The march is the single most important Armenian event in the neighborhood, and it is covered by national media such as the Los Angeles Times, Fox News, or other, well, I don't know if we're happy about Fox News, but and other also local newspapers and TV channels. Meanwhile, while these young people are doing their march in Little Armenia, the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, the archbishops of the Armenian diocese, and the prelacy gather in Montebello. They are not in Little Armenia with them, and they gather around the genocide monument. The people attending the commemorative event in Montebello is comparatively far lower than in the march in Little Armenia. And that's the reason there's a lot of conflicts going on here. One of the UIA's leaders explained to me in an interview in 2008 that the Armenian Revolutionary Federation has been asking officially Los Angeles city officials to ban the UIA march in Little Armenia in order to get more people to attend the Montebello event. Commemorating the genocide has been one of the most important and central activities of the ARF. The growing visibility of the UIA in Los Angeles is understood as a local threat. Commemorating the genocide implies here more competition rather than broad consensus. The march in Little Armenia started actually as a counter-commemorative event organized in a place largely marginalized by the elites. The eastern portion of Hollywood, even after becoming Little Armenia, again in 2000, is viewed by many established Armenian immigrants, as my own survey shows, as a rundown neighborhood, sometimes called even ghetto, occupied mainly by apathetic newcomers, and seat of the Armenian gang Armenian Power, which also, by the way, disappeared 10 years ago, but the assumption is it's very dangerous there. I lived there, nothing happened to me. I don't know. Yeah, it's not Beverly Hills, obviously, but I wouldn't call it a ghetto. From a marginalized place of commemoration, Little Armenia became the most attended place on April 24th in Los Angeles, and not only by the youth, by the UIA members, but also by Armenians from Armenia living in the neighborhood who, as some and many told me during the interviews, never participated before in any Armenian event in Los Angeles or in America. The free Sunday schools opened by the UIA in Glendale are gaining more and more attendance, while the RIF schools, notably because of costs, are facing difficulties. And here I can just take the example of the Mesropian school in Montebello, for example, which is losing students, while the community is growing in Montebello. But the newcomers, being mainly Armenians from Armenia, send their children to public schools or to these new Sunday schools, which are free in Glendale. The fact that the UIA is composed almost entirely of young Armenians from Armenia helps reaching newcomers in Los Angeles. The language spoken, the references to domestic politics in Little Armenia, or even that kind of topic, the concern about offering newcomers free classes in Armenian language or culture or history, mark a difference with the established institutions. When the Armenia-Turkey protocols were signed in October 2009, the UIA decided to organize several marches along Sunset and Hollywood boulevards to express their disapproval. By doing so, it cooperated with the established institutions, which were also against the protocols. And here I will show how this UIA, and I'm not idealizing them, show also a lot of limits. This cooperation was quite surprising, coming from an organization which always claimed to be different. The UIA differs from the established organization in its structure, as I tried to show, mainly young people from Armenia, and in the way it implements its political agenda. However, regarding the ideas it fosters, such as nationalism, the need to return to Armenia, and of course a fascination for unity and being united, I mean, their names, the Unified Young Armenians, that's the same story all over again, finally make the UIA very, I believe, similar to the organization it denounces as dominating and hegemonic. The novelty it claims to embody is more rhetorical than effective. Claiming to challenge the existing powers is actually part of a very basic strategy to actually gain power. The organization is very new and needs to be studied more deeply, of course. Nevertheless, what this example shows, and I will finish with that, is that the newcomers from Armenia are getting politically organized and are trying to find a place in the hierarchy of historical diasporic institutions. The fact that the UIA members come from Armenia affects its discourse towards Armenia and its form of nationalism. While the claims for the lost territories are central in the RIF's agenda, the UIA focuses more on Armenian challenges and domestic politics today. For example, it was the only institution, and I was very careful, I was in Glendale during that time, which organized a public lecture about the elections in Armenia in early February 2008 in Glendale, before the tragic events took place in Yerevan in March of the same year. After what happened, a lot of the other political organizations, of course, organized a lot of meetings. They were really the first to organize a public, open meeting to discuss the elections. I believe that the increasing numbers of Armenians from Armenia will eventually challenge the political structure of the diaspora, as well as the classic figures of nationalism in exile. In conclusion, The challenge of this paper was to try to go beyond the binarism of the elite mass model. This model is closely linked with the classic definition of diasporas as a distinctive type of immigrant community. Institutions and the presence of elites is one of the 7 criteria highlighted by William Safran in order to define the specificity of diaspora. I argued that it is in the interest of the established institutions to enforce the hierarchy implied by the elite mass model and to claim to be part of a diaspora framed as a strictly bounded entity. The disciplinary techniques of power that classic institutions are using are based on the divide and rule principle and the archetype of a normative unity. I showed that the hegemonic situation the institutions reached is reinforced by Los Angeles local authorities. Controlling a fictive mass serves not only the interests of those who speak in the name of the Armenian community, but also of U.S. local officials. The ideology of multiculturalism on which the U.S. democracy is based since 1965 contributes paradoxically to strengthen immigrant nationalism and hierarchies on a local level. The monopoly of a few Armenian institutions doesn't open the way for criticism and innovative practices. Even if the Armenian Revolutionary Federation was at one point of the history a force of resistance against the hegemonic power of the Church in the Ottoman Empire, it eventually became a monopolizing conservative institution. The attempts of the Unified Young Armenians to give a voice to the speechless is an example of possible resistance, even if, again, their ideology is still close to the one they try to criticize. Nevertheless, the means they choose to reach the newcomers in Los Angeles, for example, free Sunday schools, which I think is a great idea, are innovative and are based on a more democratic, pluralist ideal. This research, as you probably heard, is an ongoing work. I would like, of course, to further my research into the history of the Armenian dispersion, looking for other possible resistances which could have challenged at one point or another the collective boundaries of the group. A lot of questions still remain open, and I'm sure you have some of them to ask. Claiming to be part of a community, and in particular of a diaspora, is it necessarily linked with a conservative ideology? How can one be a rebel within collective boundaries? How can we envision a diaspora based on the idea of diversity rather than unity? Thank you.